In yesterday's devotional, we talked about Paul's opposition to some of the general religious ideas and philosophies that were floating around the ancient city of Colossae, ideas which would have been tempting for the new Christians there to incorporate into their system of belief. This system of belief included, among other things, stringent requirements for physical self-denial as a way to open the mind to closer communion with God. From yesterday's reading, one might conclude that Paul would be opposed to acts of self-denial, but that would be a false conclusion. As we will see today, Paul also emphasizes certain forms of self-denial, but for a completely different reason. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. The religious ideas Paul argued against were based on the idea that the physical world we live in is completely separate from the spiritual realm, the realm of God, and that to achieve communion with God, one must essentially disavow physical existence. Now, that may sound reasonable in some ways. After all, we do believe God is spirit. But the difference between this sort of religious thinking and authentic Christian faith could not be more profound for Paul. He takes the physical world and its reality with complete seriousness. In fact, far from rejecting physical reality, God has chosen to enter directly into this physical world through the miracle of the incarnation in Jesus Christ. That is, God has entered into the world of physical existence. More than that, says Paul, the God whom we worship, the God of the Old Testament, the God of Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac and Rebekah, of Jacob and Leah, the God whom we have come to know in Jesus Christ, is actually the creator of the physical universe. The point of religious practice, therefore, is not to free ourselves from our fleshly existence. It is to be free within our fleshly existence. For Paul, the religious ideas that separated physical from spiritual existence, far from freeing people, actually enslaved them, making them captive to ever more stringent forms of self-denial. The point of religious faith and practice for Paul is to become the people God created us to be as flesh and blood people. The irony, however, is that part of what Paul counsels sounds on the surface much like the religious practices he writes against. Listen to this portion of Colossians, and I think you'll see what I mean. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will also be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. These are the ways you also once followed when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices and have clothed yourselves with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its creator. In that renewal, there is no longer Jew and Greek, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free. But Christ is all and in all. So the question is, how does Paul's form of self-denial differ from the self-denial of the common religious ideas of that day? Well, there are two major differences. In the first place, extreme self-denial was for the express purpose of freeing people from physical existence in order to enable their minds to gain communion with God. But for Paul, self-denial was more limited in scope and completely different in purpose. Physical existence itself isn't the problem for Paul. The problem for Paul is that the human tendency to take things that are good and overindulge in them, believing that they will bring us happiness. Take the examples he uses here: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed. These all deal with two ordinary things in life, things that, used properly, are actually good: sex and possessions. The problem is not sex and possessions per se, but the wrong use of them, and overindulgence in them, if you will. And so the purpose of Paul's self-denial, or really self-control, is to free us to live as God meant for us to live, in true communion with God, in community with other people. Things like self-indulgence, as well as the other things Paul mentions: anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive language, lying. These are all things that ultimately separate us one from another. They create the kind of estrangement with which we are all only too familiar. In effect, they become the very things that enslave us to a life of misery, but not because they are physical. Physical existence is not the problem of life. The central problem of life, as Paul sees it, is the reality of estrangement from God and estrangement from one another. The solution, therefore, is not a denial of physical existence. The solution is to become the people God meant for us to be from the beginning. And the way to that life is through communion with God in Jesus Christ. If there is self-denial involved, it is in service of the new life that we have in Christ, who, as John puts it so well, is the Word made flesh. Tomorrow, Paul at his literary finest. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.